We have Mike and myself, as you can hear us talking. Let's see, who is new in this room? Let's start with you guys. We've got a spotted whistler. Who is that? Can you say hi? Not yet? Okay. Chris, do you want to say hi?
Oh, hi. How's it going?
Do you want to introduce yourselves and what your interest is in spatial computing?
Yeah, my brain is still bringing up. I'm just I'm something like a teacher and an artist, and have been pretty deeply immersed in thinking about 3D and computation for a couple of years now, and yeah, just figured I'd come say hey.
That's great. What sort of art are you working on?
Good question. I don't know how to
Where would we
make
find
these...
your work? Where would we be able to see your work?
I have a website. My website is several years of old work, and I used to build these instruments, and I started a company that was going to grow celebrity meat, and I've helped people put their DNA on the Bitcoin blockchain, and I started all sorts of weird stuff. So hey, how's it going? Where's Trevor?
Well, welcome.
Oh, hey, Trevor.
So, Dylan, Shah, do you want to say hi? I'm just going through the list. Anyone can just yell out if they want to say hi. What about Adam? I've seen your... Hi, Adam.
Hi. Yeah, I'm really excited about this. This is actually my first multiplayer web VR experience.
Excellent. Welcome.
Yeah, I had no idea that this was, this level of sophistication. I'm really excited about this.
How are you finding it so far? Does it feel out-of-body experience?
Well, I mean, I've got a lot of familiarity with multiplayer. I produced a location-based experience last year called the Blue Deep Rescue, which is
cool.
Well, I mean, that's like a full-on PC VR experience with like 6 people in space together and full body tracking, and
Wow.
now I'm kind of going the other direction. I'm really excited about web VR on Oculus Quest, and specifically making multiplayer experiences. So this is like right in the wheelhouse of what I'm excited about.
Great. Well, feel free to ask questions, and we'd love to, hear your thoughts as well.
Certainly.
Great. Thanks for being here. Okay, we've got Biz T Bomb. We're going to start in a few minutes, but let's spend another couple of minutes just saying hi to each other. Where's Biz?
I see him or her over here.
Okay. I wish we could shake hands better, but it's very hard on desktop.
How do I move up a level, by the way?
I think...
maybe I'm messing this up by being in VR and 2D at the same time.
Avi has had the same problem.
Okay. Oh, okay, cool.
I didn't solve it.
He didn't solve it.
What I did was I just recalibrated my lighthouses, and I thought that was the problem, but I don't know.
That didn't solve it either, did it?
Not really.
Okay.
We are in the early days.
I can see everybody, and I can hear everyone, so perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe 2 more people. What about Vinny? I've seen you. Oh, Vinny, are you in the room? Or Alex, do you want to come? Alex is in the lobby now. Okay. All right, well, maybe we'll get started then. Is everybody ready? I'd love to introduce Timoni. I'm trying to find where you are. There you are. Lovely Timoni West, who is Director of XR, did you say labs or?
Labs, yep. At Unity Labs.
Yeah. So it was different in your LinkedIn, so I'm not quite sure what you say publicly, but XR Labs at Uni, and Timoni gave a talk at GDC a few weeks ago around the idea of what is spatial design, how would we like it to be in our everyday life, and really thought about some use cases. And it's really, this time is just going to be an open discussion where you can ask questions and we can talk about what we'd like spatial computing to be. like in our everyday life, so we can hopefully build it to be that. And it can raise issues, it can raise opportunities, and don't be afraid to ask difficult questions. Don't be afraid to answer difficult questions. We all have our own expertise, so feel free to speak up. When you're not speaking, though, I'd like to ask you to go to mute. We often get background sounds, so it's just really helpful if you mute while you're not speaking. I'm Silke. I facilitate this group and get people together for the sake of, and Timoni said this best, trying to make spatial computing not suck for our future. But I will now want to ask Timoni, do you want to kick it off and start the conversation?
Sure. So,
Thanks.
yeah, as Silke mentioned, I talked about this at GDC recently. There's a lot of, we've had, what, 3 hubs now, and we've talked over things like privacy. We've kind of got into the nitty-gritty use cases around what could go wrong, what needs to be done. But I thought it would be fun to take a step back and think about what are our end goals and what do we really want to achieve. And it's easy to go dystopian. It's easy to even go protopian. But I want to dig into what are some use cases every day where you're like, man, I just wish I had the headset on right now and I could do this. And then we can work back from there to what do we need to build in order to achieve that future. So that, I think, is the theme of the day. I would prefer not to get too much into the bad actors side of the discussion, just because for anything cool that can be done, someone can fuck it up. But obviously, that's a component of it. So does anyone have like a compelling use case they'd like to start with, or something they're noodling on? Otherwise, I'm happy to kick it off.
Hi, Timoni. I do have a use case I would love to try, which is co-located multiplayer quest, or arena scale quest, which is co-located, but using WebVR tech if possible.
Okay. Can you expand, like, get it a little bit more into like the user story? Or is is it for a game, or is it for an app, or is it just sort of?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm actually working on a couple of educational use cases, specifically showing nitrogen buildup in divers, and wanted to do a experience where people basically manage their nitrogen levels as they dive deep together. But it's kind of a team building, like buddy diving experience, and we want the 2 people to be in the same room together.
Okay, cool.
And I'll tell you right now, the challenge I'm having with this
Go.
is actually creating a world anchor for the 2 people to spatially be correctly positioned with each other. I mean, I could do multiplayer, no problem, but making it that like the person is where they're supposed to be is the challenge I'm trying to solve. Right.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, cool. So let me reframe the question a little bit too, because there's a lot of stuff we want to do today. Like in the GDC talk, I gave an example of a great morning in the future where we got all of the hardware right and all of the software right and all of the underlying systems right. If you could really have a home that was essentially a hull of a computer itself, and all the devices could do whatever you wanted them to do, what would be an ideal workflow for you? Because there's a lot of stuff that we want to do today, obviously, that's very cool. But I'm thinking, like, in 50 years, if we nailed it, what does your ideal morning look like? Or what does your ideal workday look like? And I think what you just described is a great stepping stone into that, but is certainly something that we could almost solve today. Although we can talk about recalibration options in a bit. But I'd love to hear more about, like, have people given thought to, in 80 years when you're dead, what was your last interaction with a computer like? Actually, that's a solid question. Anybody have any thoughts around this?
I have just a very normal, not very exciting, but what I would love is a better understanding of my health. So if we have biosensors and we have cameras that can track us, and even just putting aside all the privacy issues, even sort of retina understanding, you can see a lot about your health through that. And that then in my home, it can know how well I sleep and how stressed I am. All these things, if it could be a system that could say, for me personally today, I need to take a vitamin, or I need to take a sleep, or it'd be great to go for a run, or just or it's time to get a checkup for these reasons, whatever it is, but there's a more personalized understanding of my everyday health so I can look after it myself better.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because you can imagine a future where you could have all of your food recorded and therefore most of your nutrients
Yeah.
recorded, which to me has always been like one of the biggest challenges in getting really good data. Like I can track my sleep pretty well. I know how much I run, but what I put in my body seems to be much more of like a dirty data set unless I'm being really anal about it.
And the issue I have now is that all this data is all separate. So there's no like making sense of like my medical history and my blood tests versus what I eat and what I exercise and my sleep
Yep.
patterns, like all of those together, that then can give me insights that I can't separately get.
Oh, I have a good one that I want like every day, every
Yeah.
time I go to the gym. Right now, how many people like I don't know, work out routinely or do some sort of physical activity where they're trying to like increase their strength over time? People in the room?
Sure.
Sure. Okay. How do you keep track of it today?
I don't really keep track of, I keep track of whether I'm doing it on a regular basis. Like if I'm going for, like, I want to make sure that I'm like consistently getting like at least an hour and a half of like physical activity, physical exercise. I mean, sometimes you'd like step tracking. That's probably the closest to it. Like the fit monitors in like a smartphone, I found work really well because you always have your smartphone with you.
Mhm.
But it seems to work. It seems to work best when it's something you don't actually have to like think about and pay attention to. You don't have to deliberately be making an effort to count or track. It just happens in sort of a more ambient way where there's this device that's always with you. And as long as you're disciplined about, the basic habit, then the device will actually quantify that in a way that you can then see and look at.
Yeah, when I go to the gym and it's like definitely not enough, I always forget what I did before. So I started writing down and I keep track of it in my phone. Like to your point, I always have my phone. But for the love of God, it would be so sick if I could just go into a gym and highlight like what machines I used last time and how many reps I did. And I could be like, great, now I'll go do more reps, right? Or I'll try another device because I know I didn't like this one last time. So that's a pretty basic use case that I would love to see every day. And actually, a lot of the gym equipment that I've seen at places I've stayed does have profile information. So if I go run on this something called I forget it's called Life Fitness or something, I can literally log in and use a QR code to pair my phone to my profile and record my run. So we're slightly there, but it doesn't provide any ambient information about what I did in the past on the device.
I have another wish for spatial computing, because we all have been talking about the dystopian view of information crowding our view and we're not having any agency over it. Why couldn't it be the reverse, in that it can actually remove ads and remove things that create anxiety or create a sense of overwhelming? It actually like simplifies my life a little. I know that's extremely almost idealistic, the opposite of dystopian, so it's probably not realistic, but to some degree, I think it could be.
Yeah.
Where it can bring us more back to human relationships and peaceful times and, not so bombarded as we are even today. Yeah.
I use both an ad blocker and also self-control. The app. Has anyone tried this before or heard of it?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Quiet. Yeah. So what would self-control look like? Does it? Okay. If people don't know what self-control is, it's an app that allows you to basically blacklist any websites that you don't want, because you want to focus, that you don't even want to be tempted by. So you could put Twitter, Facebook. I had Wikipedia on there and then realized that was a pretty big mistake when you're trying to work and research stuff. But just anything that you don't want to be tempted by in the short term while you're doing your job. So in spatial computing, what would it look like to try to get rid of things that distract you? Like, I don't know about you, but when I have something to do, that's when my house is the cleanest, because I'm distracting myself. So could I have a clean house overlay so I ignore doing the dishes when I need to be writing and talk?
Shout out, everyone. I don't want to be the only one responding. How do you want your future to be?
Well, I mean, I'll just toss out there that for spatial computing to really be a tool for us to enable us to have that kind of freedom, it has to first be not proprietary. By having these proprietary systems, we're giving away our rights, and we're offering ourselves up to be advertised to and to sell our information and everything else. And we really don't have a true like GNU Linux style top to bottom free spatial computing option right now. It's all very proprietary, whether it's Vive or Facebook. You read the terms of service, we're being tracked and we're giving away all our tracking data, and there's really not. It was kind of like when the web was built. Web was built as a free system. It wasn't proprietary. It was Tim Berners-Lee gave that away, and then we saw the beautiful stuff that came from that, and we don't really have that in spatial computing yet.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think I believe the second a couple of the talks really have touched on that. One reason why I like talking about the future in its optimal form is that I think part of the reason we're in this pickle with computers today being so platform specific and tied together is that there was no compelling reason to not do it. There was no compelling reason to not just be selfish and try to control the entire market for yourself, because people didn't really have a sense of what they actually wanted from computers. They kind of got it as time went on. And so I think it's really important that we do come together and share what is our vision for the real future in our lifetimes by the end of our lives, as we thoughtfully think through how to fix these problems. So we have a shared goal to make sure that we have a compelling use case when we walk in the room and talk to these platforms and try to tell them why they need to have a shared standard and be more open like the web. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, but we're kind of negotiating from a point where we've already given away our rights. It's like I don't have to give away my rights when I use a hammer, and a hammer is like a perfect tool. The hammer's not tracking me. I don't have to negotiate with the hammer. I just use a hammer, and I think Richard Stallman really says it right. It's like either you're using the system or the system's using you. But if you're negotiating with these platforms, they're already using you, so you're already kind of negotiating from a point of not having any power.
Hi, this is Trevor Flowers. To get back to the original question that's relevant to what's being talked about, when I think about 80 years from now, what an ideal sort of system that I would interact with as I die, I basically want AR glasses that boot directly into the web, and I want the web itself to be the platform that we use to make and share and experience together all sorts of media, not just AR and VR, but videos and text and audio files and computers and all of that. I think that the web is a great platform, and with WebXR, it's sort of coming into its own for these technologies. But that's the vision that I have for it anyway.
I'm kind of surprised to hear that, Trevor, because I assume you'd want it for so much more than just web stuff, like when I think about what I want computers to be in the future, I want them to be able to have any have any display be able to turn into my computer session. I don't want to have it just be tied to the glasses. I want to have projectors, show up and then fade away. I want to be able to work with any device and any type of input type I want to. Like, I'm sure you feel this way too. Can you give me like, what's it like? Okay, so you're 97 years old and you're going out for a walk. Like, what are your AR glasses doing for you?
When I'm 97, it's going to be reminding me where I live and helping me remember things that I don't remember.
That's good.
I mean, yes, of course, I'm with you that the environment itself has to be, sort of engaging in the way that the UBIComp lab in Park envisioned, 30 years ago. But I guess I was just talking about, my last sort of dying breath interaction would be that my interaction would be with a very personal device instead of an augmented environment.
Can you talk a little bit more what you mean by a very personal device?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, AR glasses, they're intimate. You know, you wear them on one of the most nerve-enabled, sensitive portions of your body, and you know, they literally are between you and the rest of the world as a mediating device. So in that way, it's sort of the most intimate device that outside of the bedroom that we could make for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's you know, when we started the trek with the personal computer, and we got computers out of labs and corporate, you know, cooling rooms, and we brought them home. That was sort of the first step. And then now that we have pocket computers, that's, you know, those are pretty personal devices. But that step to the face is if anything, a much bigger leap than those other two steps.
Yeah, two points there. First, I think what you just described is something that I heard called the half-life of computer-human intimacy. It was a term coined by the managing partner of Lux Capital, I believe, and I really like that term, that computers have so quickly gone from being in another, you know, country to being in another building to being in your building, in your house, on your lap, on your wrist, and now on your face. And then also, when the computer is on your face, it, unlike most computer forms today, the watch maybe is the closest. It then no longer feels like a computer at all. And I think this is almost the downside of what I've seen in augmented and virtual reality. When I put people in a Magic Leap, or I put people in a VR headset, they look at it and they're like, oh, a real world thing. I know how this works. And the reality is they don't, because it's still just a computer. But it's also true that it's best if they don't think about it as a computer anymore, and they start to think about it in as almost a new paradigm in and of itself, this kind of blend between the two. And that's I'm always kind of vacillating between remind people that it's still just a computer they're interacting with, and embrace the fact that they're never really going to be able to remember that. So let's just try to make it as real as possible. But then, of course, that gets in the whole inputs conversation.
There's a expectation mismatch, because it's close to physicality and close to reality, but it's definitely not that.
Yeah. And that's one interesting thing too about the different types of ways we interact with computers, that they are in various degrees of the uncanny valley, right? So if you put on a VR headset and you're in a fairly realistic room, you're on the realism side. If you're in a low poly room, it might even feel better, in the same way the uncanny valley feels pretty gross, right? But when it comes to, say, like voice, we're also voice inputs, so like personal assistants, or not text to speech, but actual natural language processing, combined with voice output. And that is also in an uncanny valley, but people don't think of it as such. It doesn't freak them out so much as it just annoys the shit out of them when it goes wrong. I see McKinsey says, with XR, the interface naturally adapts to us, whereas we had to adapt to previous technologies. I agree with that as an idealistic statement, but I think that is exactly what I'm sort of talking about, in terms of you still have a computer strapped to your face, you just don't feel like it. I don't know of anyone who has actually made a truly adaptive app for any head-mounted HMD that adapts to you. We're working on some tools to help people do that, but has anyone actually worked on an app that really does take in and try to change things about the size of the UI, or how the UI interacts with users based on their position or location or any other type of relevant world data?
Yeah, Timoni, I did. Last year, when we were building the Blue Deep Rescue, we wanted to give people a real sense of presence in the environment. And one of the things that we did to achieve that was we looked at the proportion of the hands to head in order to get a proper scale of the person's avatar, so that their body would be in proportion to the avatar would be in proportion to their body. And we really found that, like,
that's amazing.
Yeah, well, we found, like, the better we got, like, the hand body tracking to match the real world, the more sense of being there and presence the person had, and comfort the person had in the environment. That was really important to giving that, and as well as like giving people the ability to like choose like their gender and making sure that their body like looked like how they could identify with.
That's fantastic. How did you just do an initial calibration stage, or did you do it kind of seamlessly behind the as the user was as it was kind of booting up? You just sort of made note and adjusted before scaling the avatar.
Well, the users really don't realize they're doing it because we just have like an onboarding script that as they're entering into the environment, we just ask everybody to line up, and while they're lining up, we just take a quick survey of their heights of their HMDs in relationship to the ground and their hands, and it just quickly grabs a snapshot of that and scales it appropriately.
That's awesome. Did users change HMDs at any point, and if so, could you adjust, or was it just like a one-time initial calibration?
Oh, it was a one-time, and we had kind of the additional benefit of this location-based experience. So we had all of our own proprietary hardware that we were using for that.
Awesome. By the way, my screen is locked up, or not locked up, but it's not showing me who's talking. So who is talking?
It's Adam. Adam Bruce.
Adam Bruce. Cool. All right. Nice to meet you, Adam.
We met before.
Or have we met in real life before? Okay.
Yes, we have.
All right. There we go. Okay.
Many years ago.
But you look more robotic now. It's crazy.
I know, right? It's my avatar's totally different. Actually, I'm admiring how there's actually like lines in the palm of my hand, and like I love the interaction of these avatars. This is great. The finger tracking is wonderful. I can't wait for that to be part of the WebVR asset in the Unity Asset Store.
Yeah, awesome. Has anyone else done any prototyping or any other work around creating truly I guess user responsive applications, or even thought about it? I know it's hard to actually get to production.
Nope. So I worked on something that is dynamic in a strange way, which is I ran a series of interviews in VR, and before the interviews, I basically asked the interviewee to tell me what they wanted to appear as. So I hired a 3D artist to make the avatar for them. So it was surprisingly different doing that and having someone feel very comfortable in a creative avatar. So I feel like, of course, in the future, everybody can't hire a 3D artist necessarily to do the work, but having this sort of increased ability for people to be able to actually feel like they're in their avatar in a way that they're comfortable makes a huge deal for VR itself anyway.
I tend to not think about my avatar as much as others do. I mean, of course, it's kind of freaky to look down and see, fake dead digital hands, but that's sort of more of a UX issue, I think, than the concept of disembodied avatars. Can you dig a little bit into, I don't know, what are your thoughts around how you think people are going to be? What level of detail people would want out of the avatars?
Oh, it's actually much less about realism. Most of the people didn't ask to have avatars that looked like their physical bodies. Most people asked to do things like be a baby pterodactyl, for example. Yeah, so it actually was it was more figurative representation than literal representation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially with today's fidelity. Yeah. So that actually gets into kind of a related conversation around what Silke was kind of mentioning, removing things that are distracting from the environment. One of the more shocking things that that someone had said that really like rocked my socks a couple of years ago was saying that they didn't like people who had tattoos or piercings. If anyone has seen me in real life, you'll know I have both. They weren't talking to me. They just mentioned they don't like tattoos or piercings, and therefore with augmented reality glasses, they would probably try to erase everyone's tattoos and piercings. And by all means, make the world you want to see. But it certainly delves into a line between self-expression and the control of the individual. And okay, so that's kind of dystopian, right? If everyone can just sort of erase all of the physical decisions that you've made, or personal style decisions that you've made about yourself. But on the other side, on the getting back to the more protopian view, especially in augmented reality, we could then imagine a world, maybe not where we all have crazy, Hunger Games style avatars, but we can always present the best version of ourselves. And I think the advantages of that I can see there are reduced waste with physical augmentation. Everyone sort of feels better about themselves all the time. But that also means that gets into like Instagram filter territory of what is real. So has anyone given any thoughts to this, or has anything they'd like to add on this topic?
I think this is something that we're about to do a big study at Adobe on, because a sense of identity as we kind of start to really enter the worlds as avatars, I think it's a super interesting topic. But, we have the example of just showing the beautiful me, and so the authentic me doesn't come out. But it can also be completely the opposite. Like, I am very creative and I love to change the way I look, like the way I dress every day. And if I can also show that more broadly and creatively, and share that enjoyment of just self-expression with other people who enjoy it in the way I do now in my real life with friends, I would get so much out of that. And I think that it creates like a new type of language. It's not... I think this is personal as well, because being dyslexic and growing up dyslexic, words were complicated, and I really liked the visual imagery. And when I could express myself visually is when I felt like it was my first language. And I think that I'm just excited to see that this visual language becomes like an everyday thing in our lives, because I think it will open the door for a lot of people who haven't before been able to share, talk, give opinions in a visual way, animated visual way too. So I'm excited about it, but I'm also very aware of the issues as well.
So
it's interesting. I follow. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Hey, so if this is the direction you're going in with identity, you should definitely, if you haven't already, got in touch with Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford's VR Lab.
Yeah.
They have done so much work in this area. I can't remember, it's not his recent book, but the one prior to that, he actually discusses it pretty extensively, and it's absolutely fascinating work. One of the things. Yeah,
go on. Hey,
no, just in terms of
last name again.
Bailenson, Bailensen, I believe. I'm trying to remember. Like, it's not coming to me. Like, it's something realities is, again, not his penultimate book, but he actually describes identity and what, and they've done, they've been doing years of research on this, and what people's sense of themselves, how elastic it is when they can actually see an avatar of themselves. And they were giving as an example educational research work that discovered that kids learn better from teachers who are more like them. So, gender, ethnicity, cultural background, the whole bit. The more the kid personally identifies with the teacher, the more likely they are to learn. And so the question they asked is, well, let's just take that to the logical conclusion. What if the teacher is the kid? But it's an avatar. It's 5 years older. It's 10 years older. It's the version of the kid that already knows calculus. And you get somebody who's like, oh, I'm not a math person, and I can't do math. It's just not my thing. And they've created a barrier for themselves. They've created a barrier for themselves because they've created a self-identity for themselves that doesn't do math. And that becomes this huge impediment to them doing math. And if they're in a situation where they're being taught math by something that's clearly themselves, they can see themselves not just knowing it, but teaching them to others. It changes their self-image, and they're able to learn better. And it works with academic subjects. It also works with health and fitness. So if your personal trainer looks like you, but just much fitter, you're actually visualizing yourself as you're doing this stuff. And it's incredibly powerful.
That's an amazing feedback cycle loop. It's like, you want to get to here? Well, you can, and here I am. And now every time you do a rep, you'll know exactly why you're doing what you're doing. That's actually the fact that kids learn better from things that looks like them explains a lot of children's television, actually, because it, like all of the Sesame Street characters have specific ages and are emulating specific points in children's growth cycles. So that's an.
Go on.
Go ahead.
There's also looking at that in reverse. It's really interesting. There's a band that I was helping with create an app, and the idea was to sort of bridge the cultural gap where they have like really well-known songs, but other people in other parts of the world could sing the song and record it in their native language, and then you can sing it, but you see yourself as them, and you hear it sort of their language. And so when you actually are embodied in somebody else's skin and you hear their language in a song that's familiar to you, like the idea was that it was also give this level of empathy that can't be achieved otherwise through embodiment. So that's the same concept, but in reverse.
Yes, I absolutely love that, and the fact that you get to choose a translation is pretty incredible. Anyone else have thoughts around self-embodiment, or the kind of fine line between expressing yourself as a self that you want other people to see versus sort of embracing the reality of who you are? And remember, let's think like 50 years out. In 50 years, so don't worry about what the hardware is like, or don't worry about, let's pretend we solved all the platform issues and all the privacy issues. What ideally does it look like to express yourself in a world where you have carte blanche to do what you like?
It's just going to vary a lot, right? Like it's, I mean, I'm all about, I think the speculating far into the future is what we all need to be doing. At the same time, I can see how, I don't know, just everything we're talking about, infinitely fractals into complexity, like, just how we'll come to even relate to this media. Like, well, I mean, we're talking about as though there's a real self or a fake self. As you know, I'm not sure if that framing like holds under the weight of how people relate to Instagram, or just the question of naturalness, or like these as cold dead hands. Like I relate to these in a much more abstract way, I guess, and I don't even see them as hands, and I do see them as hands, and they're me and they're not me, and it's just all of these things at once, and then it's just like socially implicated in the sense of I always think about things in terms of like the economic regimes, or like how things work, like oh geez, well, what does it mean, right? Like as in, people are still talking about like this trick is still going to be interesting, like, or it's going to take us a long time to shake how infinitely cheap it is to scale something, right? And then like how we relate to that right now is just going to be well, there goes the hammer, but yeah, like people are gonna still be kind of wowed by the whiz bang of making a thing giant, or versus making things small. But when something is that cheap and fast, it's gonna change what it could mean or how we can relate to it. So I think, as in, like, I think how people will present themselves, it's kind of almost impossible to imagine or predict, because new kinds of culture are gonna grow atop the affordances of, the intersection of embodiment, computation, and space, which is just totally up for grabs still, I think. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I love what you said earlier about that divide between the digital world and yeah, I think sense. I want to touch on that a second. I think you're absolutely right. Like if I post something on Instagram, it is absolutely a filtered view of my life. I'm not posting everything about every moment of my day, and I'm not usually showing any of the bad stuff, because that's not what Instagram is for. And yet I consider that certainly an element of myself. I wonder if these new devices will, in the same way Instagram and the phone kind of promoted the concept of a selfie, where you had to think very carefully about how you wanted to show yourself to the world, but you really wanted to make sure you did see your own face. I wonder if with augmented reality headsets, we'll continue to think not very thoughtfully, but certainly very deliberately about how we show ourselves to other people.
Let's take a second to read this. Hang on, sorry.
Yeah, I know. Pause.
Oh,
Folks, you shared what it says. If you don't know your hardware is your identity, let's customize a knife for you. Oh man, Rebecca. Yeah, this is in part why I'm really starting to strongly advocate for having a digital identity that's not tied to any given platform. But that's an interesting idea. And if you walk into someone else's home and all of the sensors and all of the information gathering devices are tied to them and not to you, does that mean that your own computing devices that you've brought into their home can't work as well either? Right? That's interesting. Like for example, if and this is going to sound dystopian to some, so I apologize. I'm just trying to think through optimal use cases, dynamic land style. How many people, if I say dynamic land, do most people know what I'm saying? I know a lot of you can't speak, but
yes.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So in a world full of projectors and sensors or other sort of display devices, I could say, you know, actually, even today, right now, I come home and I say, play music and turn on the lights if it's after 5 p.m. So my home kind of welcomes me home, and I love that. Now, if Silka walks into my house, as she does many times, it doesn't play her song, right? It's only ever going to play my song because now we're in my house, even though in her home, maybe she has the same thing set up. And that's what I mean by having, you know, personalized computer systems in the home that might not let you do what you wanted it to do because you're in someone else's home now.
That's interesting, because when I get in a cab, though I've never done it because it's too awkward, but if it was a good system, you can play your own music in cabs, right?
Yeah.
But then they're giving permission that I can do that. So there's a permission state, and understanding all the social nuances there is going to be interesting.
So
yeah,
absolutely.
One thing I'll toss into the mix. It's hard for me to bring my opinion to the table because I think I come with a very different perspective about all this. But once people bring dynamic land into the discussion, so you know, to me, dynamic land. When you say 80 years, I actually do have a really clear vision for that, and or a personal ambition,
Chris,
which
just
is
for everyone else, can you quickly explain what dynamic land is?
well,
just for
so
everyone
I can
else
try, right?
in
So,
two
so
sentences.
I'll try. Let me see if I can do 5. So dynamic
Okay.
land is I don't know if you'd call it a computer first or a room first. It's sort of like if a public library were a space, a material space where people go and compute together. And it's strongly paper-based. It's the principal researcher is Brett Victor, and then obviously his supporting team and financiers and stuff. And there's currently, I think they're in Oakland, right? Or somewhere in And so it's just a very different way of relating to computation. And so, you know, what I was going to say before is sort of like, in 80 years, I would hope that there's no such thing as a person who uses a computer, like in the way we're talking about it now, because, you know, like dynamic land sort of imagines like a very different relationship to computation. It's not just about like projectors or sort of like, you know, the very important questions around identity. Well, dynamic land solves a lot of that by being like materially, you know, co-located in a space. But yeah, it's just kind of like trying to think about like, so right now we as a civilization are largely a sort of like programmatic illiterate civilization, in the sense that we consume, we mostly are incapable of composing like systems media, computer media, right? So much of the discussion around spatial computing is still assuming that same kind of logic of like, we're going to consume computer things as users that other people make, and sort of all our values stem from that. But my perspective on that is like, that's the wrong context to be working on, and it's very easy to continue working in that context. So like, so
keep going. Tell us what you want in 80
Yeah.
years. How do we interact with computers? Because I think
so,
we share
so
a
I mean,
similar vision here.
it's I think we just have to kind of, that's kind of like asking like, you know, like what is cubism in the time of like Renaissance, you know, aspiration toward photorealism.
I don't know, man. I think people are jumping alongside you.
No, I'm not. That's not a refute. That's not saying no. That's saying like, we have there's no ready at hand answer. The answer is we have to work to invent it, in the sense of so, you know, I think the answer is in the same way we don't you know, shuffle around zeros and ones literally. You know, we use higher order abstractions for, you know, from just going from zeros and ones to machine code to, you know, sort of more languagey, you know, blah blah blah. Like, so finding other ways of relating to composing systems media, behavior media that aren't, you know, as cruel as say code, could be one avenue of pursuit for that. You know, just new notations, new embodied ways of relating to composing computer media, I would think, is what I want and what I'm working on and what I'm trying to get people to.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on?
So right now I teach at art school, and one of the things I do is I try to facilitate those kinds of exercises. So there's all sorts of different things. I had students who made something that was like, you know, a way of programming that was like training a dog, and not in the sort of just like machine learning is like training a dog cliche, but like, you know, I wanted them to call it dog park, like Xerox Park, but it was sort of like building these, you know, you throw sort of, you know, it's just training this, like the way you trained the dog and taught it tricks. It was sort of aggregating. It could recombine behavior. It could take two behaviors that the dog were doing and kind of like, you know, this like Minecraftian alchemical they'd come together as a sort of new behavior. And I'm not sure if that scales to like, program anything, but maybe it's an education thing. And anyway, there's a lot of student projects in this direction. So it's just early research work, I guess. But yeah, anyway, for me, the context is humans aren't users of computers, like unless using means making systems media.
I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Soka.
I don't think you're alone in that point of view. And if you were, I would really like to hear it anyway. I think we need different points of view. So that's an encouragement for anyone to speak up, even if you think it's not what is or even if it's half-developed thought. Please, this is a space to feel free to talk about these things.
To go nuts.
Go nuts.
One thing I wanted to, we have about 15 minutes left, and Vinny had earlier mentioned that, he wanted, actually, Vinny, can you talk? You could actually just summarize what the statement that you had made earlier. If not, okay, it was about being able to connect with one's, it was about being able to connect with one's loved ones more effectively. One thing that I have been pondering a lot recently is that the current wave of computing devices is kind of socially flagged to be a little rude. Like if I look at my watch, even if I'm finding out information that's relevant to both of us, like you asked me what the weather is and I'm looking at my watch to see what the weather is, it in that moment feels dismissive because it's coded to be like, oh, I'm not paying attention to you anymore. I'm distracted and I'm looking at the time, even though if that's not the case. And if I look at my phone very often, even if I'm looking up something on Wikipedia that relates to a topic that we're discussing, it again looks dismissive, or it looks like I've opted out of the conversation. To me, one of the real amazing affordances that comes from multiplayer augmented reality is we have this ability to be working in the same digital space on the same digital thing at the same time. In virtual reality, we get it, but in augmented reality, we'll have that combination of being able to see, real people and in digital goods in space, so that there isn't that disruptive social element, or potentially could not be. And I think that's one aspect of feeling a closer connection. But I'd love to hear people's thoughts around whether or not, or how we could use this emerging technology to feel closer to our loved ones. I mean, dynamically, an example would be that if someone puts down a smiley face card, the entire space is transformed into playing Don't Worry, Be Happy. And this means that if you were in another room, your computer is now, or your environment has now changed based on having someone who's in the other room who has still done something that affects you, and that hopefully in a good way, like a loved one sending you a card or a digital hug, or calling you on the phone, something like that. Anyway, does anyone have any thoughts around using technology to empower these types of stronger relationships, or what would be different about augmented and virtual reality specifically?
I really like the book by Amy Chase, or Amy Chase now runs the Calm technology idea. And from that, there was this really nice product that you had a little light that looked like a home, and you put it in your home and you put it in your loved one's home, and the light turned on when you came home, and the other person could see that you were now in your home. And it was just this really subtle way of going, I'm allowing you to see when I'm in my personal space, and you're letting me see when they're in your personal space. And though this is not at all about AR, it is about spatial design computing. And and it's spatial computing in a very primitive sense, but it is a way of subtly feeling connected to other people instead of being rude and saying, I'm here, my status, green light, it's kind of giving more of an emotional connection. And I really liked that subtle design.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, that's interesting. Every day when my dad would come home on the farm back in Nebraska, you'd hear like him walking up the stairs, you'd hear the creaky door slam. So that's kind of a beautiful digital equivalent, right?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And can I just say something completely different, on a whole different track, but on the same topic? I gave a talk last week at a design conference, and I was co-presenting with the head of marketing at Adobe, and it made me really think about advertising. What are the success criteria, and why is it the way it has been for like so long, 30 years in advertising, where it's about clicks, eyes, unique visitors, really short-term criterias. To build relationships, it would be really nice to see that shift into thinking about other longer-term criteria that even customers would buy into, such as, the length of friendships. That you can see that for commercial profit as well as benefit for people, that it doesn't, and then the design of the app wouldn't, or the tool or whatever, would change accordingly to develop deeper relationships with each other. Or if we can start understanding somebody's emotion, can we have a success criterion about positive relationships, communication, rather than toxic ones, and advertisers get more credit for that? I'm just making it up as I'm talking now, but I'd like to see this shift in the way that we think about what is success in our social worlds.
What is success in our social worlds? Yeah, is it length of? That is really interesting too, because is it length of the relationship or amount of trust or what comes out of that relationship? Yeah, those can all be different things at different times.
Yeah.
I think what you just described is the framing of the metric. It's like unique visitors and stuff are metrics that matter to Facebook, but not necessarily the users of Facebook.
Exactly. Exactly.
And, metrics that matter to you are length of the friendship and stuff. So it's just a shifting of perspective, what you're really talking about.
Yes, but one that benefits the user.
Well,
that's interesting.
Steve,
why you are tying fitness and health to success of their users as an example. I think that's a great example as well. It seems like a lot of companies are doing that, that are self-interested. So either they want to save on insurance, or they are the insurance company, or are now trying to encourage people to be more healthful just so they can save some cash. But hey, whatever works, right?
Exactly. That's a good analogy.
I tend to be less interested in the using spatial computing to strengthen human connections. I think we're already pretty great at that, as opposed to what my personal interest is much more about streamlining human communication and thought connection. So we're using computers as these sort of not only augmented brains, but as augmentations to all types of communication, so that we can move more quickly and more effectively to better and cooler stuff and new improvements. Because it does seem like a lot of the challenges we face, or a lot of wasted cycles, or a lot of the stupid decisions people make, are largely based on a lack of information or a lack of awareness about the true implications of it. That's a little idealistic, but that tends to be what I'm most interested in. But it's true that a lot of getting shit done involves a lot of trust as well. So, any other thoughts around spatial computing for improving human communication, human relationships?
Yeah, I'll toss one out. And it kind of relates to two quotes. The first quote is from Clay Shirky, which is, "It's not until technology becomes technologically boring that it becomes socially interesting." And then the second one, and I really wish I remember this guy's last name. His name was Andrew, just a random person I met in San Francisco. But we were talking about the effects of technology, and and I don't know why it didn't occur to me, earlier in my career. But he basically said you cannot really forecast the effects of technology until after it occurs. Like, for example, with YouTube, we could not foresee the whole YouTuber streamer revolution 20 years ago, because the whole concept of how the economics work and how it socially would work out was just beyond our perception, until the technology both came out and also became boring to the point where it was just a simple utility. So it's like the revolution, it's almost like these tools have to hit us. We have to synthesize them. We have to stop, being excited about the novelty of them, and then get into utility of them before we can really get the true value of them.
That's one thing I've been sort of pondering on with the notion of the computer as a computing device, which once it hit common parlance, it stopped becoming it does compute, but that's not the point of it for most people. They don't use it to compute things. They don't give it a, at least on a sort of surface user level. Instead, we use it for all sorts of other things. So the name itself, it becomes increasingly kind of archaic or a throwback to what it originally did.
I'm just noticing people are starting to leave. I just want to make a comment before they leave, and then we can keep talking. But our next, by the way, we're renaming, first of all, this group because we actually did not have a name. It was just kind of a description. So we're calling this Spatial Assembly. Does everyone like that? Anyone hate it?
I love it.
Great,
great.
thanks.
It's pretty
Good. Spatial Assembly it is. In 2 weeks' time, in a fortnight, we're going to have John Lax, who's the Director, VP, bigwig at Facebook, who for VR and AR. So he's going to come and have a similar open discussion around spatial computing and the design and the design patterns and around that. So I've started to make it easy for everyone, I've started an Eventbrite page so that you can add it to your calendars. I'll be posting that after this meeting for the next event. Last thing, if anyone wants to host or anyone wants to recommend other people to be a guest host, please contact me. You can email me at silka@silka.co. Just feel free to contact me, or you can also email me at silka@adobe.com. So either way, and all those emails get to me. I'd love to hear any recommendations. And back over to you, Timoni.
Yeah. Well, actually, I don't have too much more to add. Thank you so much, Silka, for having me. Well, I mean, I'll join other hubs as well, obviously. And thanks to everyone for joining. If you have any other, so this is partly selfish, my questions on my part, because we're trying to build the tools now for you to build the future that you want, which is why I'm so interested in what people really want out of the future. So if you have other ideas, or if you have read something recently you think is great, or have seen some talks, or you think there's something that I should be looking at, I would love to hear more about it. But I appreciate meeting everybody in virtual reality. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Timoni. This has been such a great discussion, and I like how open it's been, because it means that we can all be part of it, and makes our brains think about, hopefully for the rest of the day, we'll all be like thinking about this conversation, and it will have some impact on what you do during your day. Thanks so much, Timoni. I wish we could all clap. Can we all clap? Yeah, no, yeah. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
All right.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.
See you later. We're actually finishing on time. Okay, I'm going to close this session.